Hi, I am Dr. Kim Sage. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. Welcome to my YouTube channel and to this video series called Wildly Loved, where we are really unpacking and diving into the trauma brain responses we're often living in as a result of often complex or complicated childhood wounds. And we're talking about attachment wounds here, right? A lot of this work is trying to unwind and change the fact that our brain had to make some adaptations to survive in childhood, but we're no longer in childhood, but we're still living as if we are. This video series this week is specifically about hypervigilance and even more, more in depth around what I call low-key hypervigilance. Really where we're not necessarily in a super fight or flight PTSD response, but we are living in as a result of often repeated patterns in childhood where we're just kind of always on guard. And we often think that everything that happens in the world is, our fault, or bad things will always happen. We kind of overanalyze, but deep inside our minds and our nervous systems and our bodies, we're just sort of jacked up all the time, right? And we don't know how to really relax. And then if we do, it's often at the hands of numbing or substances or binge watching TV, or maybe online shopping. Our brain is living in a heightened state. And it's not, like I said, all the way up there. There's not a tiger coming tomorrow, or, I should say, there's not a tiger coming right now. But in our state, there could be a tiger tomorrow, every single day. And so we're living like that. So let's go through and break down, as I've just done the first two videos on kind of defining hypervigilance and going into the questionnaire or statement list of what I call low-key hypervigilance. Please feel free to check those out if you're new here. Also, if you're new here, please consider subscribing and clicking the bell and that little box you can check, and that way you'll get notified when I post new videos. I am posting Monday through Friday in this series right now. So if you're new here, welcome. I'm glad you're here. All right, so let's assume that you are saying, yes, I do think I have this low-key chronic hypervigilance state. What really happens and what areas of my life does it show up? So we're going to go into a few categories where we see this. Now, when we get to the categories where it's even stronger in the classic PTSD part, I will highlight that. But assume that all of these happen in both low-key and more classic hypervigilance, and that in the more classic pattern, they're going to be even more turned up in the volume, even more intense, even more dysregulating, even more significant at times. They might vary, right? But it doesn't mean it's not distressing for us if we're in the low-key version. I just want to honor that a trauma response and an anxiety response are similar and yet different, and also hold hands and are related. So just keep that in mind. So in terms of the first set of symptoms, we're going to see emotional symptoms in both of them. Emotional outbursts, difficulty regulating, but in a more low-key way, it might not even be that you notice it, but I'm feeling it on the inside. As I said, I might have a low-key grudge against you and be mad at you, but never tell you. I might be able to go to social events and fake my way through it, but when I get home, I'm exhausted and depleted, and it was just, I didn't want to go, things like that. But you may not have ever even seen that or known that. We might have kind of a roller coaster amount of symptoms where it's like high highs and low lows. Especially in the low-key one, I think it can kind of be where the middle ground is not really a good, easy place for us. So we're either very down or very hopeful. We can feel, as I said, overwhelmed in large crowds and noisy places. We can overreact to everything around us, including people's facial expressions, tone of voice, the kind of emojis they send. We're just always, it's like scanning and reading minds and moods and intents all of the time. Even if we don't want to, it's just how our brains work. They just kind of go over and over and over everything. And at the core is this persistent worry, right? There's just this overarching worry all of the time. And so it might not be so obvious in a more low-key version because you may not see it in me at work, for example. But maybe in my mind, everything you do as a coworker, I'm thinking, are they mad at me? Or was that about me? Or why'd they say that? Or is that deep sigh because I was talking too loud on the phone, right? We're just always doing that. And we might never tell them that, but we feel it. The next set of symptoms is more behavioral, or more behavioral, I should say. And so we have this heightened awareness in our bodies, right? We're sort of paying attention, and you might be able to tell or you might not. I might just be darting my eyes around the room. We can have an intense startle response where just no matter what, even if like my kids laugh all the time, I just like the littlest thing, I will just like jump. It's so annoying to them. But that is often, for many of us, that nervous system response where we just didn't know what we were going to get. Especially if you had parents who you had to walk on eggshells. You just never knew what was going to set them off, right? So you're easily startled. You might have a hard time focusing and concentrating on what's in front of you, especially if you're kind of in your mind somewhere else. And you might be always scanning the room. Now, if you had a bad event happen, a more PTSD event, maybe you're looking for, in terms of like, let's say war veterans, where's the nearest exit? Where are the doors? Or maybe you are, have been affected, understandably so, we all have, by the increased violence in the last, 20 years. And so you're always, looking at people's faces and assessing them, or you're looking at, do they have a weapon? Or like I said, where's the fastest exit? Now that would be a more classic, a little more up the PTSD response. A more low-key version might be that even though on the outside I'm like laughing and talking and engaging, I'm really uncomfortable in my body inside. I can't relax, and I just sort of don't know how to be in an environment like that where I don't have this kind of looming sense inside that something bad could happen. Maybe I don't have language for it, but I feel it. Next one is physical symptoms. Now, physical symptoms in the more classic type are going to be things like difficulty sleeping, and enlarged pupils, increased heart rate, breathing, sweating, restlessness. Those can certainly be in your more classic PTSD hypervigilance. But in the more low-key version, you're still having a lot of anxiety at times, right? So you might have insomnia a lot because you're overthinking the conversations of the day, or your mind just can't calm down. You might be restless. You might have a hard time focusing and concentrating. You might have, at times feel that the panic inside, and that can trigger a panic attack and feeling a heart rate increase. Even though it might be rare, it still happens to you. So that's the difference. And once again, these are all nuanced. They can obviously kind of, connect easily to one another. The last category is the more interpersonal symptoms. This is where we often avoid social interactions. This would be the classic sense. We would take things personally. We would focus on people's, once again, overreading, their tone of voice, and often have difficulty in relationships, like I said, holding a grudge but not really talk about it. Really, the emotional and interpersonal are the really places where we can often have the more low-key version, but maybe you don't know it because I'm not close enough to you to tell you about it. But the dynamic is that at the end of the day, as I said in this questionnaire, it's like it always comes back to being about you, right? It's never, your first thought is never, oh, maybe this is their issue. It's often, what did I do wrong? Or, even something like a person challenging you on a social media post. Instead of you just being like, oh, like that's stupid, something happens inside where you feel triggered or angry or not heard. And even if you don't respond to them, you have this fantasy about how you'd like to rip them apart and respond. And really it's some stranger, like who cares, right? But at the end of the day, you're kind of always questioning yourself. Well, maybe they are right, or maybe that was a dumb, cringy, video or whatever. Even though you didn't think that before you read it, right? So it's just this constant chronic, it's like it always comes back to being about you. And your senses are heightened. So things like, I'm saying, mind and mood and startle responses and things like that. So those are really the main ways it shows up. And as I hope I shared the different dynamics, it really is a matter of degree. But the chronic one plays out in relationships with ourselves and others pretty much all of the time. So lastly, I just want to say that it's important to remember we do need some hypervigilance. It does tend to keep us safe. If we go to somewhere to get a drink and we're not paying attention to where we're setting our drink down, this is a candle, but right, we can be at risk for things. And so there is a point where we need to keep it. What we're trying to do is work on the place where we live in it all of the time. It's always in our bodies, it's always in our minds, and it's always in our relationships. And it truly affects our ability to get out of that trauma brain, that child who's tiptoeing on eggshells. We don't want to live in that. We really don't. We want to live in a more peaceful, regulated state. Even if it's just about us developing the tools to get out of it, it's important, I believe, to have them. So I hope this video was helpful. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to come back and see me tomorrow. We're going to talk more about how this shows up in relationships specifically. And then Friday we'll talk about ways to deal with this issue if you have this one. So thanks for watching, and I will see you tomorrow. Take care, guys. Bye.